meeting to order for Monday, October 11th. Take the roll, please.
Alderman Hoffer.
Present.
Alderman Nelson is not here. Alderman Hanneman.
Here.
Member Cheehee.
Here.
Member Howard. Here. Member Schmidt is not here, but you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Liberty and justice for all.
First item on our agenda would be citizens' comment period again, which is standard procedure. If anybody wishes to make a comment, address the committee. Now is your opportunity. Again, anyone wishing to address the committee. Seeing nobody rushing toward the microphone, we'll go ahead and close that and move on to item 3, which is really a continuation of our existing business. And that is reviewing the 2022 mayor's recommended budget and related items.
So, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'll sort of try and lead the conversation. The whole purpose of these meetings have been to adopt an operating budget for the city as well as budgets for the balance of the funds. When you adopt a budget, you essentially set a resource as well as a spending plan. So in essence, the resources are substantially, and then the spending plan are all of the expenditures that we've been discussing over the course of our previous meetings. I'll direct your attention, if you will, then to to page 13. The tax levy divided by the assessed value of all the properties in the city establishes the tax. 13 of your book, and we're going to be spending a lot of time in those front pages of the book here, so I'll be having you move around quite a bit. But page 13 describes our preliminary look at the assessed values of the city. And the item that I would have you draw your attention to is the far right. For the entire city, the assessed value increased 6.6%. But within property classes, we are showing that the residential property class increased 8.6%. The effect of that is to raise taxes to residents by transferring property back to the residential property. And that's a function of the fact that residential property values are rising faster than non-residential property values. The other increases are also listed there, as well as the assessed value that we expect for the tax incremental financing districts. I'd also like to remind the committee that at this point in time, assessed values are on a preliminary basis. We won't receive the assessed values for manufacturing property as they are assessed by the state and at the Department of Revenue in Madison, and those will arrive here in Franklin sometime in the next 2 weeks. So sometime by the end of October, we will have final assessed values for the city, but we do not yet have those. If you page forward one page in your book, we're going to combine the assessed values that we just talked about with the tax levy that we're also about to talk about, and that will establish the tax rate. So on page 14, you see a whole bunch of information, and at the very top you see the assessed value of the city, and that takes the total assessed value before you remove the TIDs. So it would be the leftmost column of the previous page. That then is part of the calculation of the tax rate. Then there is the equalized value, which is the estimated market value of all the property in the city. Those values are determined by the Department of Revenue in Madison. And process provide information to the state on what we believe market values are for properties, but the market value for the city is determined by the Department of Revenue. Take the total market value of the city and you subtract out the tax incremental financing increments, then go to the TIDs to finance project costs. And we'll talk about that when we get to the TIDs. What you're left with is the equalized value of the city without the TIDs. And that is the value that establishes the equalized tax rate. Why that's important is the tax levy from county, MATC, MMSD, and the various cities gets split up amongst the various taxing districts based upon their equalized value. So our equalized value combined with Hales Corners equalized value and Greenfield's equalized value becomes the portion in the city of Franklin, then gets apportioned that out. Franklin School District is wholly owned within the city of Franklin, so 100% of their levy is divided up amongst the Franklin properties that are included in that district. And likewise, the Oak Creek School District and the other districts. By this calculation in $32,000, and you divide that by the equalized tax value without the TIDs, you get our tax rate of $4.81 per $1,000. Why that's important is participation in one of the state aid programs requires that that number be $5.01. You're really going to get no real shared revenue, but you'll get a little bit. As that number rises up greater than $5, there's shared revenue available through a expenditure restraint program at the state. Finally, we get the total tax levy for the city, including our TIDs, from the other taxing authorities, which will raise the TID total tax. So the difference between the $23.5 million and the $22.4 million is only a portion of the tax increment for the taxing districts. Near the bottom of this document, we do take that $23,524,000 divided by the $4,874,874.82 per $1,000 of assessed value. Everybody with me on that? Okay. We'll have a couple of supplementary pages for you. This is just talking about the assessed value over time. Peggy, I'm going to give you the second page right away so that you don't have to go back around. So we have 2 pages of supplementary information on values that we thought you would find somewhat interesting. First page has a number of 3 sets of columns. Looks like this. And on this document, you can see the value of property across the city by property class over the last 10 years, and what the change in total property values over the last 10 years, and what the change in total property values are over time. So the most recent tax property increase is 8.1%. In 2012, it was 0.2%. And so you can just kind of see how those values have changed over time. Our total equalized value, you can just kind of see how those values have changed over time. Our total equalized value now is $4,877,000,000. That is the 3rd largest in Milwaukee County. 10 years ago, $3,653,000,000, and I believe we were 4th or 5th on the list in the county. And $53 million, and I believe we were 4th or 5th on the list in the county. And so the city of Franklin is growing much more rapidly than other communities, and our pegging order in the county has risen. The percentage by property class is listed in the next section, and then at the very bottom we list what are the assessed value in the various TIDs over time. The shaded areas were the periods of time in which the TID was not open, and that's why there's no values there. On the second page that we handed out, these are assessed and equalized values for real property, personal property, total assessed and total equated. Of that, when a city's assessed value as compared to the equalized value falls below 90%, the state can force cities to have a reassessment of all properties. The City of Franklin, with our more recent reassessment values, and there you see the dollar sign assessments, we essentially keep our assessed values pretty close to equalized values, and we are in good shape relative to the state's concern to be close to equalized values. Any questions on any of that material?
Are we on annual or semi-annual assessments?
Alderman Halford, would you repeat that just so I get it on the record?
Is that every year automatic reassessments?
No, the city gets to contract whether you want reassessments or not. We currently contract with our city assessing firm to do reassessments on an annual basis. The reassessment, $30,000 to $50,000. So included in our assessor numbers in that department rate, when we talked about that, was a $30,000 to $50,000 appropriation to go through another reassessment next year. Now, you'll recall during the summer when the reassessment numbers came out to property owners, increasing. And recently I had occasion to compare a particular property owner's property tax bill from 10 years ago versus now, because they were asking the alderman some information about why are my taxes rising so fast. This particular property owner had a $1,000 range, but it really doesn't matter. Their property value had increased 25% over the 10-year time frame. But their actual property taxes here in the city of Franklin, all districts included, only rose 4%. So even though their property values were rising very rapidly, their total tax had only increased 3.5%. So all of the work that we've done here at the city level has not caused property taxes to increase very much at all over the last 10 years. Most of that increase has occurred because of county tax levies. Alderman.
How does that municipalities in our region, in terms of if that person's tax rate increased only about 3% over the 10 years, how do other municipalities in our area compare with that sort of average increase in a 10-year time frame? Average increase in a 10-year time frame.
What I can tell you about that is we include with the property tax bill a chart that shows the city of Franklin's tax rate compared to the other Milwaukee County tax rates, and it's by school district. County tax rates, and it's by school district. You will find that the city of Franklin's tax rate is, out of 20-some taxing districts, we're like third or fourth lowest. So while our property values are rising very, very rapidly, our total tax levy here in the city of Franklin, even considering the various school districts, is not rising very, very quickly, and it is still some of the lowest in the county. Now, the issue, though, is that Franklin properties tend to be higher value properties. So if you took a $250,000 home in Franklin and you dropped it into another taxing district, would it still be valued at $250,000, or would for instance, Franklin's average home is valued at around $260,000. Well, the average home in many other communities is not valued anywhere near that. And so that might be one reason why people think their taxes here in Franklin are higher, and it's partly because property values are higher. So that's the discussion surrounding property values, and I'd invite you to include these pages behind your assessed values so that should that come up at a later discussion, you have these pages available to you. And I'm going to direct your attention to page 15 in your book. We're just going to walk through these early pages because they're really the summary of the entire budget process. On page 15, as you consider potential changes to the budget relative to the amount of levy that you're changing, either an increase or decrease, is on a per $1,000 value or the tax rate. That's the purpose of this particular page. And the page following that takes a look at two different types of properties. if you look at a per $100,000 value with the average and our tax levy going up by 4.3%, a home valued at $100,000 would see a $21.60 increase in tax. The average home a year ago was valued at $261,300. Again, if that was an average home in the city on the right, $83,800, and their property tax bill for the city of Franklin only, this is not because we don't know the levies from the other districts, would increase by $56.58. So again, as you're making your deliberations relative to a change in the tax levy, these are numbers that you may want to. The following page, page 17, just again looks at 10-year averages of the total of tax levy here in the city of Franklin, tax rates over those 10 years, and the equated TID-out tax values. So the equated tax rate as well as the assessed tax rates. And then last, levy limit worksheet from the Department of Revenue. And we've prepared this document with the assumption that the proposed tax levy is in fact what we have. If you would focus on line 10 of section A for a minute, you would see that the tax levy that the state says we can have $132,110. The proposed tax levy is $110 less than that. We'll use part of that because when we calculate taxes, the penny rounding, when you're taking it times 14,000 different tax values and 6 different taxing districts, the penny rounding ends up amounting to $10 or $12 a year. And so we do need to preserve some of that. Otherwise, the state will penalize us for exceeding our maximum tax levy. Okay, so we include this here. We could increase taxes more by claiming more debt service levy. We could increase taxes more by claiming more debt service levy. And so that is a possibility if there was a desire to raise taxes for some other reason. So that's the big picture overview. Now that you've also heard the discussion, over your last several meetings of the individual departments as well as funds and what's happening with those particular operating and capital requests, as well as what the mayor has decided to include in his recommended budget for those capital items. We'll talk about, let's walk through the recommended budget for those capital items. Let's walk through the individual funds and what that means. So I'm going to ask you to back to page 18, which is where the general fund begins. And at the very first page at the top, we talk about resources. If you would, remember that columns 2, 3, and 4 on that page all represent the same year. It's the 21 original budget, the 21 adopted, 3 represent essentially one item at 3 different points in time. And then the next column, the department request, is what we would be looking at if we adopted exactly what departments requested. And then finally, the mayor's recommend budget is what you're currently considering. Everybody with us on that? General fund at $19,931,500. That's the portion that would belong to the general fund. Page back 2 pages, because the tax levy is what many of the public are concerned about. You see that at the top, on the page 20, at the top, you see the tax levy in the far right column for mayor's recommend and how that's split by fund. $19,931,000 in the general fund, $1,347,000 in the library, $53,000 going into various capital funds, and $1.1 million for debt service funds. So that's how that compares to other years. I would also remind the committee that the format of this page is the required format that we must include in our public hearing notice to the public for all of our tax funds. So you have to show at least 1 year of history, your current year adopted budget, any amendments, a forecast for the year, as well as your proposed budget for the coming year. If you page back 1 page, you see the results of operations for the last several years. So near the bottom, you see total expenditures, which was several years. So near the bottom, you see total expenditures, which was bolded. Beneath that, net resources or expenditures, which is the net resource or deficit, as well as the fund balance. So those numbers are bolded at the bottom of page 19 for the general fund. And in 2019, for the general fund. And in 2020, the city generated a $565,000 surplus. For 21, we budgeted a $2.7 million deficit. Most of that was all contingency money that we did not expect to spend, or transfers contingency money that we did not expect to spend, or transfers out of the general fund for one purpose or another. We amended the budget to increase the deficit to $3.5 million. We are currently projecting that the general fund will have a $327,000 deficit for the current year. We'll have a $327,000 deficit for the current year. For 2022, if we had adopted what every department had requested and said we're going to include that, we would have a $1.5 million deficit and have to use savings from other years to be able to sit, and have to use savings from other years to be able to pay for that. The mayor is recommending that we adopt a budget deficit of $2.5 million, but all of that is restricted contingency money that we do not expect to spend. So in essence, what the mayor has recommended to the city and to the common council is a balanced budget. So as you move forward into your deliberations, should you decide to make changes in either resources or expenditures, you have to make a change in both. If you're going to expenditures, you have to make a change in both. If you're going to increase or decrease resources, in order to keep a balanced budget, you must then also consider what changes in expenditures are going to make. Since more often than not, there's more requests for expenditures, if you decide to add to expenditures, you then need for expenditures. If you decide to add to expenditures, you then need to find a resource to pay for that. That either becomes tax levy, and we are already at the limit, as we demonstrated to you. Then you must find another resource through some form of a fee increase or some type of increase in a resource. So the mayor has recommended a balanced budget for the general fund. That is something that you now must consider as you can think about all of the requests from department heads. I'm going to ask you then to page forward 2 pages, and we're going to walk through the city's budget. So if you go, you are now looking at the debt service fund for the city. So in prior years, the city decided to build purchase equipment or make additions to buildings of one type or another and borrow money on a general. And at the top of this page is the amount of money we must levy to our taxpayers to pay for the debt service that comes due next year. And again, if you look at the top fund, that's the actual debt service levy. There's a special assessment fund, if you will, which helps us modify those tax levies. We are projecting next year that we will show a deficit of $62,000. That is because we borrowed some interest of about $35,000 in prior years, and we can use that to offset part of our levy. And then we'll use some of the special assessment funds to balance this out so we have sufficient resources. $167,000 worth of debt service principal and interest payments next year. Any questions on that, on the debt service fund? If you want to see what that means in terms of going forward into the future, we can talk about that. There is a future 10-year debt service levy included in this document later on. I can tell you that we are projecting a level debt service levy at $1.1 million for the next several years, and then the debt service levy will need to increase. If you keep your operations where you are talking about an absolute tax increase in the future, or you are contemplating taking on the books, because that future 10-year debt service also takes a look at what borrowings we expect to borrow for general purposes. Any questions on that? Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to step forward one additional page, and we're going to a district at a time. So on page 22, you are looking at tax incremental district number 3. This is at the north end of 27th Street. Essentially, it's the Northwestern Mutual Project and associated properties. The tax levy to be $1.8 million. We also expect $509,000 worth of state shared revenues coming into the district. We have debt service payments of a little over $1 million. So the fund will generate a $1.3 million surplus. Tax incremental district has current outstanding debts of $1,375,000. So the surplus next year, along with accumulated balances, the district could and should close next year. Caution, caution, caution was next year. Caution, caution, caution. There are several taxpayers in this district which are challenging their levies and succeeding on that. And so the district is having to make out tax refunds to property owners for a portion of their taxes, as though they are being successful in challenging their levy. But there should be sufficient resources here in this fund to close this district next year, hold on to reserves for a few more years to hold on to see what those additional challenges next year, hold on to reserves for a few more years to hold on to see what those additional challenges might be, and then finally close it out. So District 3 should close next year. If you go to District 4, TID 4 is the southern end of South 27th Street, essentially encompassing Ascension Hospital and 27th Street. Essentially encompassing Ascension Hospital and the related properties south of that. That district is expected to generate tax levy of $1.3 million, have shared revenues of $53,000. It has no external debt, but it does have an advance from one of the other funds. You'll see that it has a surplus projected for next year of $1,350,000, and then would have an accumulated surplus of $616,000. Since it's generating a $1.3 million surplus and it only has $1.3 million worth of advances next year, the decision to close a district is required by, Peggy, April 15th, I believe you have to notify the district?
May 15th.
I think they moved that up 2 years ago to April 15th. But let's adopt a resolution to close the districts if that's what it so chooses to do. But both of these districts are potential candidates to do that. The benefit to the city of closing these districts is that increment that you saw on the tax calculation of nearly 100. So again, you're going to be flipping back and forth. But on page 14, we show the increment for 2021-22 of 85 plus million in TID 3 and 61 plus million in TID 4. That $150 million of increment would then fall back into the city. 60% of that benefit would then be available to increase taxes without any other residents, and residents would still see a tax reduction. Okay? So I'm going to page forward then to page 23 as we walk through the various TID districts. In TID 5, giving the districts, in TID 5, given the increment that was back again on that previous page that we just looked at, we would expect tax increment into the district of $1.2 million, $230,000 of demands on the developer for either pilot payments of demands on the developer for either pilot payments or shortfalls in debt service payments. Because the debt service in this district for next year with 0 principal payments, I'm on page 23. I'm looking at the top section TID 5. I'm on page 23. I'm looking at the top section TID 5. There's $710,000 worth of, principal payments and $689,000 worth of interest payments for a total debt service payment of $1.4 million.
This is
TID 5,
ballpark.
$1.4 million.
This is
TID 5,
ballpark.
ballpark comments.
Thank you.
TID 5 currently has $27,495,000 worth of outstanding general obligation debt, as well as municipal revenue obligations promised. We will be making demands on the developer for a portion of that $231,000 that's listed up above for shortfalls. If those are not forthcoming, that $200,000 plus or minus would then have to be done via an advance or future increases, because this is general obligation debt. And Common Council has said, we promise to raise taxes sufficient to make these payments into the future. If you step down to the bottom of that page, TID 6, this is the Bear development in the southwest portion of the district, southwestern portion of the city. $1 worth of debt outstanding, as well as municipal revenue obligations yet to be issued when the infrastructure is accepted in that district. For next year, we expect taxes to be $37,000. There's been very little increment generated in this district to date, and we are showing demands. There are 3 developers that we would make demands against to total that. Should that money not come in, we have debt service payments next year of $2 million. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong column. I was at the change from the prior year, not the current the current one. We have tax increment of $37,000 and $28,000. So we would expect to make demands on developers of $572,000 and use up some additional fund balance. We also plan on issuing $1.6 million in new debt to fund $1.5 million of infrastructure costs. That is yet to be approved by Common Council. Any questions on TID 6?
There is a house that's going up in there, am I correct?
There are multiple homes going up in there. I think there's about 7 or 8 home
There's
permits.
2 that have started. There's,
Commercial is,
no permits to my knowledge have been issued.
permits. Well, we shouldn't say that. Copart has started.
Copart is actually, yes.
Projected closeout on this one?
TID 6 would be somewhere in 18 years or so from now. So this district just got started more recently. So, and I think we projected about 18 years before that district would close. It's very much dependent upon the large industrial user in that
Strauss,
district.
yeah.
Strauss. If that doesn't happen, significant issues for the city. We go then to the next page where we have TID 7. TID 7 is Velo Village, another portion of the Ballpark Commons development. In this district, we have Commons development. In this district, we have nearly $20 million worth of equal increment in the district. We expect to collect just under $500,000 in taxes, as well as interest from the mortgage to the developer of $210,000. We've budgeted the developer of $210,000. We've budgeted a $780,000 municipal revenue obligation payment to the developer, as well as interest payments of $127,000. That you'll see that generates a $235,000. That you'll see that generates a $235,000 deficit. So staff would not recommend you make the entire MRO payment because there's insufficient money to cover the city's debt payment, and that is a provision within the developer's agreement. The increment in this district is coming on a little agreement. The increment in this district is coming on a little slower than we expected, partially just due to construction delays and items of that nature, but we'll see if it gets to its full value a year from now. And that district has $5.1 million of GO debt outstanding and a municipal revenue obligation of just under $15 million. It is a I'm trying to think of what the name of it. It is a blighted district associated with it. Any questions on TID 7?
The residential apartments are nearly complete?
Done and fully leased up.
Done. So it's the kind of there's a couple spots on this, I recall, correct?
There's one vacant commercial lot on that yet for a retail operation.
Yeah. Thank you.
TID 8, bottom of page 24. This is the newest of our TIDs. We would expect tax levy next year of about, we have included in this budget capital outlay expenditures of $5.7 million, a new borrowing of $6 million, and various other formation and operating costs of, we'll call it about $100,000, debt issuance costs of a deficit for startup costs, if you will. It does have a $100,000 advance from the general fund. If we're able to do this next year, we still won't be able to pay off that particular advance from the general fund, but it's moving in the right direction. None of the project costs have been applied to proceed with those. We would need to borrow about $6 million to fund that.
And this is way south 27th Street.
This is essentially a continuation of TID 4,
Business park.
but it has excluded the residential property that was originally included in TID 4. Other than that, it's the essential same area. Next page, page 25, merely combines all of those TIDs that we just talked about. Unless there's questions on the tax incremental financing districts, we'll go to the next major area of expenditures. Begin the discussion on page 26. So as you can see, the front of this book really is the summary of everything. The back of the book is the detail for all of these expenditures. First fund in the capital section is the Utility Development Fund. This is a fund where of special assessments for utility projects in prior years, as well as some connection fees for properties that decide to use the utilities and haven't yet contributed towards the cost of that infrastructure. It currently has about a $2.5 million fund balance. We have transfers out of $1.4 million, if you see that there, which is substantial, and very little resources, which essentially takes their opening fund balance and takes it in half. Staff would ask that we're going to come to you before this meeting is over with and ask for some amendments to this budget. One of the amendments is a transfer out of this fund that I missed when I was pulling together some of the projects. And so we'll bring that to you in a minute. But the Utility Development Fund has we'll bring that to you in a minute. But the Utility Development Fund has $2.4 million in fund balance. We would expect to transfer out $1.5 million to other funds, taking that fund balance down to about $1 million, and that would all be for sewer projects only, as the water funds would be depleted. The next fund is Fund 27. This is our impact fee fund. By state statute, we are required to tell the taxpayers how much we will collect in impact fees for next year by fee type. So you will see in the public hearing notice that we will enumerate all of these impact fees. These are making assumptions as to how many homes permits will be issued, as well as how many commercial permits and what size buildings will be done, and that's how those particular numbers were enumerated. Near the bottom of that section, you see expenditures. And earlier this year, the Finance Committee was taking a look, and staff had brought to you the fact that there is a substantial fund balances here that are no longer needed to serve debt payments because the debt has now been retired. You will see that we are now planning on using $5 million for various projects. And then as we get to the project fund types below, you'll begin to see how much of that is fund balance and how much of that is actually related to individual projects that qualify for impact fees. We would take the $8.6 million open $6 million. So you'll see there's a substantial use of either current year collections or unused prior year collections going forward. The largest transfer out is water impact fees, and that would be for the water tower project that's anticipated by the water utility. Then I'd ask you to page forward to page 27. We have 4 spending capital funds. Capital outlay is the first one. This is where general equipment replacements are taking place, as well as new equipment purchases of one type or another. In this fund, in 2021, we had nearly $300,000 of tax levy in the fund. For next year, the mayor is only recommending that we have $53,000 worth of tax levy. Part of the reason is that additional $250,000 of tax levy was needed in the general fund in order to balance it in terms of tax levy was needed in the general fund in order to balance it in terms of operations. And we've been doing this for a number of years, reducing the tax levy in the capital funds and sending it back to the general fund for its use to balance operations. We then have charges for services of $925,000. We then have charges for services of $925,000. That would be landfill siting revenues. So this is a portion of the landfill siting revenues going into the capital outlay fund. Total resources of just over $1 million. The mayor's recommending expenditures of $1,400,000. The mayor's recommending expenditures of $1,486,000 with a $50,000 contingency, showing total expenditures of $1.5 million. So again, we are spending down $500,000 of activity, $500,000 of activity, $340,000 of that is coming out of the impact fee fund to come forward to this. So earlier we talked about use of prior year balances. $340,000 of that is coming out of into this fund, and we're spending down a further $150,000 into this fund, and we're spending down a further $152,000 of fund balance. Is everyone following that by the numbers on this document? Any questions on that? Then I'd move you forward to the equipment replacement fund. Remind you that the equipment replacement fund, remind you that the equipment replacement fund is for existing equipment that we've purchased in prior years, and we've decided to put that equipment into this fund. It is longer lasting equipment, so more than, say, 5 years. More expensive equipment. Equipment should have at least a $20,000 value. More expensive equipment. Equipment should have at least a $20,000 value to be in this fund. And then this is scheduled replacements. We expect resources of $700,000. $600,000 of those resources are landfill siting fees. Landfill siting fees. $96,000 in equipment sales. So this is used equipment that we've said has come to its useful life, and the Highway Department says they expect to be able to recover about $96,000 on those equipment sales. But we're planning on spending $1.7 million to replace equipment. My recollection is that was some fire equipment and highway equipment for the most part. We can go back to the details if you want to see what that is. But that would show a deficit of $1 million. Fund balance in the equipment replacement fund then drops to $600,000 in the future. As we've talked about before, future replacements of equipment that are scheduled are going to deplete this fund, and we will have to find some other resource to make this fund work in the future. And we get the benefit of not expensive piece of fire equipment, which is scheduled for replacement.
So the fund balance is going to be $807 at the end of 2022, and the next 2 years, very luckily, are very light on needs. So the hope is that we can build it up a little bit before our next big year in 2024.
So we would page forward then to page 28. There's 2 more capital funds. Fund 46, our capital improvement fund. This is the fund where the very, very largest projects that the city does are controlled. We're expecting 638,000. 560,000 of that is general transportation. No, that doesn't make any sense to me. Those intergovernmental resources. I have to go back and see what that is, because there are a lot of numbers in our budget, and I don't always remember every last. That resource of 560,000 is transfers in from the impact fee funds. So that really should be in the transfers in, not in that.
Assuming those are eligible projects.
Yes. Well, no, this is use of prior year's impact fees because we have excess fee balances on hand, so we don't need it for debt service.
Okay.
Right. Then there are a lot of transfers in for projects that have qualifying impact fees. Mostly they are park impact fees, but there is a substantial amount of water impact fees as well. Project costs of $13.5 million. The largest of those project costs would be the water tower project at about $7 million. There's $1 million. Peggy, is the fiber optic, is that in this fund?
It is.
So there's $1.3 million in a fiber project in the city to extend some fiber network. That is using the ARPA funds that the city has been awarded, along with another project.
Some parks projects.
That the telephone project was the other ARPA funds.
Yeah, but that's not in.
No, that's in a different fund. You're right, thank you. We show a net deficit in this fund of $1.4 million, which is, or $1.5 million, which uses the opening fund balance, $1.5 million, which uses the opening fund balance. We're showing a $1,400 fund balance in this fund when we're all said and done. So we are substantially spending all of the money. We have a contingency of $140,000. So if some unusual project comes to you during the year, you really have only $140,000 to spend. Or if some project would go over budget by some amount, you only have $140,000 to use to make that work. Alderman. Alderman.
So the transfers in of $11,555,000, does that represent the ARPA money?
Transfers in are $11,555,000 as well, and within the details back in the capital improvement fund budget, you can see the details as to which funds are transferring in and how much.
But this fund would use up some of those existing balances that have accumulated in as well.
That's correct. I believe that total number was it? We'll get that for you because we have it. I'd rather get the right number than describe the wrong. It's several $100,000 that we're using transferred out. The last fund to talk about is the Street Improvement Fund. Here we have intergovernmental revenues of $1,240,000, $200,000 worth of landfill siting fees, and project expenditures of $1 million. The city engineer has asked that we provide you some additional information on street program. Peggy, you kept your copy? So I'll give you a couple minutes to read the city engineer's comments. had a chance to at least read it one time? I see the city engineer is here. Does anyone have any questions for the city engineer on that?
There is just one change, and we talked to the city engineer about this prior. It states in here, the first paragraph is simply just correcting that. We had talked about those 70 miles of streets. Were they really just from 1999 to 2000, or were they all prior? And they were certainly all prior. But just so everybody is clear, the funding in the 2022 budget, which is what the finance director just referred you to, is 1.5 million, not 1 million. So there was a concerted effort by the mayor to increase that street spending for 2022 by 500,000. 2022 by 500,000.
There is also a list of the streets that the engineering department is recommending for consideration that has been included back in the packet under the Fund 47 document, if anyone wants to see what those streets are. And since the question came up a few minutes ago as to what were the transfers in and out of the various funds, I just placed at your position a reconciliation of the transfers in and out across the budget. So you can see in Fund 27, the various transfers out and where they're going. There was an extra, it's a little hard to even see it. See it there, but my guess is it's over $500,000 that was going to the various capital funds of impact fees that were collected, and not necessarily for qualifying projects, but for prior projects. What this document essentially shows you, is that there is the transfers in and the transfers out to the various funds in the budget do balance. So it's not like we're transferring money in someplace and then it's not coming out of somewhere, and every dollar that's being transferred out is going in some other place. What we discovered is that there were $140,000 worth of transfers out and in related to a project in the Street Improvement Fund that got overlooked in the budget. So we're going to ask you to make a recommendation to Common Council to add $140,000 of transfers into Fund 47. Transfer out of Fund 22 of $70,500 for water, and a transfer out of the water fund of $69,500, all related to the 50th at Minnesota Street project. So that $140 in Fund 22, and we would be expecting the water board to be transferring those monies out of the water fund. So that would be the first recommended motion for you. We'll summarize that for you at the end of this whole meeting. Page 28, where we were talking about the Street Improvement Fund. Any other questions about the Street Improvement Fund? Sure.
And not specifically with the numbers in the budget, but since we do have the city engineer, this report is a big need, and I think we've all kind of known that it's out there, and it's not something we're going to be able to bite off all in one chunk to get everything up to where it needs to be. So is Board of Public Works kind of working on a plan, a request? I apologize if I missed it in our capital improvement plan and kind of saw over the years. But we have to have a plan as to how we're going to tackle this, other than just raising taxes all at once.
I have the same question.
And have some cake while you're here too, please.
million-dollar question. Last year I came up with the 5 things that are the obvious ways to fund it. This year we're trying something new. I think I mentioned last week, but tomorrow night at Board of Public Works. This year we're trying something new. I think I mentioned last week, but tomorrow night at Board of Public Works, we're taking a trip to Oak Creek, looking at doing more chip and seal kinds of things. Caution everyone. Everyone says that residents hate it, but it's a way to at least extend the life. So we are trying to think outside the box, look at different ways to do things. Alderman mentioned last week after this meeting about possibly, could we save any money by maybe having landscapers come in and mow our parks and free us up to do road work. So tomorrow afternoon I'm actually meeting with a local road work. So tomorrow afternoon I'm actually meeting with a local person to do that. So don't know. Got any ideas like Alderman Hebner had last week? Throw them my way. We're looking at anything and everything, just trying to be creative. Go to a lot of conferences and ask a lot of questions with my peers and asking those kinds of questions. I wish I had a good answer, but eventually we're going to have to start funding more things.
Alderman, I would also make sure that we understand we're not talking about a difference of $50,000 or $100,000, much as $1 million to $1.5 million over our historical spending. And the resource available for that is limited. You could raise taxes to do that, and there is room to do so in our tax levy, but it is a real tax increase. And another option would be to borrow the money on an annual basis for that purpose or some portion thereof. But if you borrow it, that means you raise future debt service.
Right.
So no matter how you look at it right now, absent a brand new resource available to the city, and I believe the city engineer has commented before, that is something that you could adopt and it would not impact your levy limits.
Correct.
Because you can move outside of levy limits on that. But some property owners might consider that a tax increase without being on a tax levy. So it is a conundrum. I think documents that our spending on streets has been less than been desired. And the time to address that on a more real basis is becoming more urgent.
I'm interested in the notion of a street utility, would like to at least explore the option, and if not for 2022, but going forward, 2023, 2024, but at least have a plan that we can, and a means that we can start chipping away. So we can, and a means that we can start chipping away. So the backlog of streets doesn't continue to deteriorate and increase.
So Alderman, I would find it very, very challenging to get staff to put together a street utility within the next couple of weeks, because there are significant.
Oh, no. I'm
well,
not
you said for 2022.
No, I said not for 2022, but
apologize.
I'm thinking forward the 2023-2024 period, because this isn't something that's going to be fixed in 1 year. At 2024 period, because this isn't something that's going to be fixed in 1 year. Absolutely.
But even the concept of a street utility requires a significant amount of staff work to determine how that gets allocated on a legal basis. So staff would need significant notice. Staff would need significant notice to investigate that in order to make that even a possibility.
So I would just have a couple suggestions.
Yeah.
The first thing is, I don't want anybody to lose sight of this. We have increased the street spending from $1 million in 2021 to is calling all streets the same thing. So whether it's a subdivision street that perhaps lasts longer than an arterial, so we have some work to do to separate that out to determine what the problem is, I think, before we get too far in trying to create street utilities and those kind of things. I think the other thing is I would ask that directive come from the very, very large, substantial community decision.
I might just add that the breakdown between the arterial streets, and I think the subdivision is key to this as well, because then I think that really gets to the priority. It's where dollars have to go first. I don't know that the exact dollar amount is so much the key. We know that it's increasing and going up. I think what also factors into this equation is that this is a continuing expense. We break it down by 12-month periods, big state law and budget that these elected officials have to approve and so on and so forth, but we know that there's millions of dollars that over time will go in. And since the bulk of this work is done with outside contractors, that price varies based on market demand and availability. Right now, construction,
Very high.
labor, very, very tight or pretty expensive. One of the things I would urge you to do, and I know we've used in the past, which was somewhat, I think, kind of, I don't want to say frowned upon, but people looked at it and said, well, what are you doing? Opposite side of the economy, these people were standing there with their pavers all loaded up on trucks and nowhere to go, and we were spending money 2 or 3 years at a time, at least in the 12-month budget allocations. But this is money the city's going to spend anyway. And I would urge you that if themselves, you bring these to these elected officials, because whether we spend $1.5 million, if that's the number for 2022, or $2.5 million if it becomes a bigger number or whatever, if we have those opportunities where we can do more miles of street, per dollar, I think it behooves us in the money regardless. It doesn't need to necessarily be divvied up in 12 months windows. Paul likes it that way because it makes everything match up, but I think we've seen the impact of it where, we've been able to strategically purchase and to get opportunities or work, and it becomes a win for not only the contractors, but the cities, the taxpayers, and all involved. And again, this money is going to be spent regardless.
Sure,
So a lot of communities, what they'll do is they'll pre-design.
Regardless.
sure.
So a lot of communities, what they'll do is they'll pre-design a number of streets for that very reason. So they're all designed and ready to go at the point in which that strategic buying opportunity presents itself. So
Right.
definitely good advice.
And that becomes back to the thing I think we just talked about with the arterials and the subdivision streets, because they may not have equal, priority in terms of usage and condition and whatever, but that when that time presents itself and council would approve it or be presented with it, you kind of have to be ready to go, know which areas you have, and be ready to act. But I know that was done in the past, and I think it was done very effectively.
Our collective geniuses in Washington are presently considering an infrastructure bill. Is there any money possibly in any of that for local roads?
My understanding is that the infrastructure bill does have a road component to it. What filters down to municipalities as opposed to states or counties is unclear at this point in time. And as we all know, some weeks ago, hasn't happened yet. It may or may not happen. And even when it does happen, we don't know what's going to filter down to us.
So just to take on to that, the American Rescue Plan Act that came out last year, and the funding that happened it was approved this year, but it was to directly allocate to local municipalities, and that happened. There is a very large push right now for that same thing, so the best thing for municipalities is if we would get direct allocations versus having to go at it from a competitive standpoint. A community like Franklin has a harder time going at things from a competitive perspective, that all the things they want us to do, but then when monies are available, usually that's the thing that puts us lower on the list. So we're, National League of Cities has really been pushing for that, and we've been part of that.
I might also add, if I can, I think that's, with those uncertainties out of Washington, it only behooves us to have a role with that, because if that does happen, every other community is going to be out there soliciting, and there'll be time limits and so forth. So again, another, reason or opportunity to make sure that we kind of know what the pecking order is, what the priority, so that if it does present itself as an opportunity, we're kind of ready to act. And there may be timelines with these contractors in terms of who's ready to go, and maybe who's,
for some
Right.
ready projects.
especially if there's deadlines, to have stuff completed, et cetera.
It's part of what makes the cost go up, too.
There's deadlines, to have stuff completed, et cetera.
It's part of what makes the cost go up, too.
Excuse me?
It's part of what makes the cost go up, too, when everyone's trying to...
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think this is an area that has gone necessarily unnoticed. Personally, this is one that I continue to keep in the back of my mind, that as we look at the favorable benefits of the landfill and kind of where their levels go, this is a fund I think that we have to keep. This is a fund I think that we have to keep, at least in my opinion, near the top of the list as getting a portion or percentage, or looking for ways to do that, because I think the public sees that on a regular basis. That's when they can tell in potholes they feel. Go ahead, Ed.
I certainly understand, and it makes sense where arterial roads would have a higher priority, just given the nature of traffic, et cetera. But when it comes to the sun and out of their driveways multiple times a day and hitting the potholes and the cracks, and it's filling up with ice during the wintertime, we can't neglect those folks either.
Absolutely. I think that's where this, this needs and analysis, and you've got, some of it broken down here, rating, I think, system, and I presume it's the similar or same one that you use currently, with these different classifications, and, it becomes, I think, pretty evident once they hit those, and you're forecasting, what's a 5 now and how soon they're going to be coming, to address those needs.
The road rating report is included in the mayor's recommended budget book, so when you get back to the road program, that information is all available to you.
Excellent.
Good program. Then I direct your attention to page 29, which summarizes all of the capital funds. General comment here is that the capital funds are supposed to have a deficit of $7.1 million, all of which would come from fund balance, with no new debt included in our balance, with no new debt included in our capital program for next year. The new debt that's included in the mayor's recommended budget is all in either the TID program or in the utility program. There's no other questions about the capital funds. We'll move forward to the other special revenue funds, which begin the discussion on page 30. I hope you can appreciate the way this book is put together. This is the summary at the very top and front of it. This is the summary at the very top and front of it, all of which the details are things that we talked about earlier. So the first fund is our American Recovery Act. The city has received a $1.8 million contribution earlier in 2021. We are scheduled to receive a further $1.8 million in the summer of 2022. We believe that the city can demonstrate that substantially all of that is due to a revenue shortfall as defined by the act. And so there are few restrictions. Money. $1.5 million of this is scheduled to be transferred out to one of the capital funds, one or more capital funds to support projects in 2022. The library fund, the reason it's listed here, the library fund, the only real comment that Common Council has for the library that's assigned to the library so that the library board can decide how they're going to use that money for their operations. And the mayor is recommending that $1,347,200 be allocated to the library. In the 2021 budget, it was $1,337,000, so there's a $10,000 in. Speaking, the mayor has been having the library fund tax levy increase by approximately the same amount as what the tax levy increase is by the levy limits, is what's there. But I'd also remind the committee that $20,000 of landfill siting money has also been directed to. But as a way to direct some additional resources to the library, the mayor has recommended that $20,000 of landfill siting be directed there. That is under the control of the Common Council if they so chose not to do so. The item below that is the library auxiliary fund. No real control by the page 31. And all we're doing here is we're listing all of these funds. Tourism Commission controls its budget by state statute. A portion of the hotel tax is its primary resource going forward. They have not yet submitted their budget, so that's why the mayor's recommended budget for that group is their budget, so that's why the mayor's recommended budget for that group is blank at this point. Solid Waste Fund, as we talked about when we got there, there are two major resources: an annual grant from the state for recycling activities, and then we have the charges for service. This is activities, and then we have the charges for service. This is the fee that we charge residents and not commercial properties, residents. We expect that to go up to just short of $2 million for next year. A reminder, staff is recommending that that fee be increased by $5 per year per residence, by $5 per year per residence, which would bring the fee to $139.60. But again, that is based upon a CPI index of 2.25, which is what the contract haulers' costs will increase by the amount that the contract haulers' costs will increase by the amount that CPI increases for calendar 2021. Currently, that's running at 5.25%. So if it increased that far, we could have a substantial reduction of fund balance because the hauler costs would increase, but we have to make our decision by November 17th as to what that fee is going to be to residents. Any questions on that? Then there's a number of grant funds. The first one is the fire fund. They've asked for $5,000 worth of grant income and $5,000 worth of page 32. Again, they are a balanced budget. They would expect to expend whatever grant money they receive. There are no fund balances in that fund. St. Martin's Fair Fund is the one that we talked about when the clerk was here. So I'm not going to spend any time on that unless there's some questions. $25,000 of grant receipts. There were $485,000 worth of grant expenditures. Since that point in time, the Health Department has applied for and received, and the Common Council has accepted new grants totaling $640,000 for next year. A report of health grants by grant. And this is merely showing what's in the mayor's recommended budget. And this budget you will see in months, but no resources. So the health director has now suggested that we put in expected resources equal to all of those expenditures for the grants. And then I would direct your attention to page 5 of 6. And this is the Volition. And this is the Volition Grant, where we would expect to receive $120,000 in grant resources but the health department didn't put in the expenditures that are associated with that, and so they've now given us those. And we would ask that you amend this budget for that. And we would ask that you amend this budget for that. Again, I will have a recommended change to the health grants budget when we wrap this all up for you there. But this would be additional pages under the health grants fund budget for you to consider. Any questions on that? Any questions on that? Then the donations fund, we aren't expecting a whole lot by way of new donations, but we do have public safety requests for $100,000, all of which would be, all of which would be coming out of fund balance from previous issues. And we've shown as part of expenditures a $20,000 transfer out. That's a reconciling item. It should have been showing as a transfer out of this fund, and it's currently included in public safety expenditures. Civic celebrations, we don't currently show any resources into this fund, and we don't currently show any expenditures. Peggy, did we get a request to modify that? On page 33.
They're all in BSNA. I'm not sure if you.
We'll have to bring to you a request. We'll bring it to the Common Council meeting because we don't have it for you this evening.
What's the $13,000 in miscellaneous?
That's a transfer in from the general fund. That's a transfer in from the general fund. General fund does two transfers out every year. $13,000 is its contribution to the civic celebrations, and an $11,000 contribution to the St. Martin's Fair Fund. Civic celebration generally generates enough resources from beer sales and other kind of ticket sales to cover its other expenses. I just didn't get that brought forward to this document, and that's my apology to the committee. Then if you go to page 34, we're summarizing all of the special this. Once we have the tourism, once we have the library funds, once we have there's one other fund that's missing. Tourism and library are the two major ones that are missing, as well as civic celebrations. The request went out about 8 weeks from them. They no longer have a staff liaison. The mayor forwarded the request to the chair of the committee. We told them that they can't. Pardon me?
We do not have a meeting scheduled.
Well, so once we close out 2021, they would be precluded from spending any money until they adopt the budget. And when because of the city's control over the members of the commission, we do the accounting for them, and so we just need to be notified as to what budget they're adopting.
I mean, my point of a meeting is that going to hold up what you need to do.
It just means we can't disperse any funds next year until they have a meeting, because they would have to.
And then you'll just adjust the budget after that point.
Well, we will adopt the budget when they adopt the budget. So if they adopt a budget in January, we'll record that. Authorities adopt their budget prior to the beginning of a year, but if they don't get a chance to meet and adopt their budget until later, just they have to understand they can't spend any money until they adopt the budget.
We'll make that request again and see if we can get one before November 16th, which is when this budget gets approved, or gets considered.
Remember, the water board typically adopts their budget in November, but sometimes the water board waits until December to adopt their budget. So the Common Council is scheduled to do it by mid-November so that we can issue tax bills. We can't issue a tax bill until we have a tax levy, but the other commissions aren't technically taxing, and so. And then direct your attention to page 35, in which case we have the sanitary sewer fund. We talked about that when the city engineer was here and we reviewed the public works budgets. I don't plan on spending any additional real time on that here unless somebody has a question. 7, in which case we have this special revenue, the internal service fund, which is the self-insurance fund for active employees, not retirees. This is for active employees. And this particular budget, the plan is to spend down about $300,000 of their rather significant and hefty. And so there is a desire to maybe spend it down a little bit, but you can appreciate that health costs are quite volatile. And we have had years where the fund was going to generate $1 million deficit because claims costs were extremely high. And one has to be careful with this, but a $3 million surplus is pretty significant on $3 million worth of expenditures on an annual basis.
Question, John?
Yeah, what are we doing?
Question, John?
Yeah, what are we doing as far as wellness and all that kind of stuff?
So the city in 2021 implemented what's called Go 365, which is an online activity tracker. Credits, you get credits. We have a wellness rate and activity tracker. Credits, you get credits. We have a wellness rate and a non-wellness rate for our health insurance premiums. In addition to that, we have a health risk assessment that employees are completing. In the past, we really haven't been monitoring the results from year to year to put together active wellness programs. That's something we're monitoring the results from year to year to put together active wellness programs. That's something we're now going to be doing going into the future. In addition to that, the NICE healthcare program that we started in 2021, those are the providers that do the biometric screening. So we do a pretty full load on biometric screening. Again, something that's going to help us with going forward.
Is there any projection for how much that might save us?
There's a lot of industry standards out there. What they say is for every $1 of prevention, you save $17 in claims. Can I prove that? I can't. I think if we just look at anecdotally, we've heard that a couple of our members could have had some pretty serious things going on that were caught in some of those biometric screening.
Yeah,
the reason we
really
went
helps.
to, it really does. It's hard to put your finger on, was it going to come up in another way, or did it really get prevented because of that, or was it going to progress amount of time period? But I think in the end, the model that we're using now is a little bit better than the model we were using in the past. In the past, we did the biometric screening here at City Hall. We did it for a couple days, and we just had people come in. You know, we were flat out told that people didn't fast, and you know, it was just one of those things they had to do to get their well management from our employees, so that they have those provider contacts, so that they can do something perhaps about any issues that may arise. Again, we're very early. We don't even have, this really has to be our base year, because the company we were using for the biometric screening and the health risk assessments last year went out of business in June, so we didn't results from prior to 2020. So 2021 is going to be our baseline. It'll be 22 at this time by the time we are able to start putting all that together. But we do have a commitment from our provider as well as our consultant to make sure that whether it's under the health insurance plan or the NICE healthcare, they're all going to be compiled so that we can get some good use healthcare. They're all going to be compiled so that we can get some good, useful information for those wellness programs. But at this point, we really haven't started
Well,
too
it
much.
should be a plus no matter what, so.
Right. And we're getting some good feedback. We had a couple hiccups with our Go 365 program. We did a passive implementation in 2021 because we used to have Go 365, and I think we jumped to a conclusion that employees were more familiar with it and on board than they actually were. We're going to start 2022 with a complete, just like a brand new program kickoff, and see if we can get a little bit more, engagement on that behalf. But what we're seeing right now are the people that are in on wellness are all in, and the people that are not in
Yeah,
are all out.
not everybody's.
So
gonna pick
that's
it.
something we're going to be looking at, and we've started to talk about performance-based. So what are those metrics as far as any of the 5 major health indicators. A lot of private companies have gone to that. We probably are a ways away from that, but we are starting to talk about it in our 5-year strategy plan. Away from that, but we are starting to talk about it in our 5-year strategy plan.
Is there any incentive for the employees to participate?
The incentive right now is a reduction on the health insurance premium on a monthly basis, and it's sizable. I want to say, depending on which plan you're at and which level you're at, the percentage is different. Depending on which plan you're at and which level you're at, the percentage is different, but it's not $10. It's more, in the tune of, I think it's like $50 to $60 more in premium if you do not participate in those items.
Yeah,
But again, that's just participation, which is where we're at right now.
yeah.
But again, that's just participation, which is where we're at right now. We need to get our participation in there. We need to get some comparisons going. We need to implement our wellness programs, and then we can start talking about performance-based.
Yeah, what United Health does is they send debit cards, and debit cards, and that's pretty effective, and the debit cards isn't really a lot of money.
Right,
But
right.
it's right head of mind.
And is that for provider participation? Like if you go to a doctor's appointment, you get that? Is that what it is?
Right.
That's a really good one. It's a motivator. That's a really good one. It's a motivator because we know that when they come to the city or to come to these mobile clinics that are just a one-off, they tend not to take them really seriously, but when they go to their providers, they take it a little bit more seriously. So yes, every provider contact, we believe, is going to help wellness down the road.
And they do things like give out, you do a certain amount, you get a $100 debit card.
And that's really the basis for Go365. So Go365 allows you to earn points on a regular basis, again, linking up to your fitness tracker. And then there are other things you can do. You get a flu shot, you get points for that.
Yeah,
COVID
right.
vaccine, you get points for that. If you do, you're able to earn the same thing. Those kind of
Yeah.
fitness things, as well as gift cards to some
Works
major
good.
nationals.
Okay.
So that pretty much wraps up the staff's discussion of the budget. So I would refer you back again to page 8. So on page 8, you have all of the major sections that we just talked about. The general fund being a balanced budget except for the restricted contingency of $2.5 million. The debt service fund essentially tax incremental financing districts. We have a $7.6 million borrowing planned in that group, $1.5 million in TID 6, and $6 million in TID 8. Special revenue funds, not a lot going on there. And then the capital funds, which we talked about, summarizing to the total city budget. The sewer budget is not listed here, but then you also have the internal service fund. So and there are no new debt that the mayor is recommending for the city. Then I would direct your attention recommending for the city. Then I would direct your attention to the document that I just put in front of you as we were having the discussion about the health service. This is a listing of several funds and a staff request for an amendment to the budget. So under the utility development budget, we're asking that you amend the budget to include the $70,500 transfer out. And that's going into the street improvement fund. And so under the street improvement fund, we're asking you to amend the budget to include a $140,000 transfer in, and the other portion of that $40,000 transfer in, and the other portion of that money is coming from the very bottom. The water utility is expected to transfer the $65,500. Then we've had discussion about the health grants, and there you see the ARPA grant, there's 3 grants, an ARPA grant, a CDC public health grant, and an immunization COVID grant. So that's the $640,000 of new health grants. Then we show the Volition Grant, the $120,000 worth of receipts, as well as the $48,000 worth of expenditures, and then last small health grants, which did not include any of those receipts. So I would be asking the committee to include a motion to make these recommended changes to the budget as well as any others. At your place, I included a recommended motion if you wished to make a motion to modify any other portion of the mayor's.
I mean, I think it makes sense. We probably take this one as is, and then we can go through and do if there's additional ones, probably on a individual by individual basis. So we include these in the 2022 recommended budget.
Can I just say so moved? I didn't get where all this was going in.
So we have a motion and a second on the summarized changes that Paul just referred to, all health grants. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of that recommendation to be added to the 2022 recommended budget, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, that recommendation or motion passes and recommendation will be included. That sounds like a good idea. All those in favor? Let's do it. Let's go ahead and reconvene. Then I guess we have to kind of figure out how we want to progress forward, what areas you want additional changes we may have as far as recommendations to the council, et cetera, et cetera. So anybody want to share their thoughts or input or questions for Paul? Or
I would just say I'm more interested in overall trends like the street funds, issues like that. So I don't have any particular recommendations that I would, or changes that I would recommend.
you don't want to take $50 out of the fees or meeting, committee and meeting or conferences or whatever, but that's the way these meetings used to go. I would tend to agree with you all, Ed. I think the amount of time that not only the mayor, but the staff that we have with us tonight in the operational side, especially, I think has gone through the detail. Much of that is a continuation of I don't want to say necessarily regular services, but services that carry over from year to year and get accomplished and need to be funded and conducted. The one area that I thought the one area that I thought might have some discussion would be potentially the 5-year capital plan, as we looked at some of those details and paid some of those details and pages. There's a lot of information there. Some of that filtered through to the mayor's recommended budget this year. Some of it is maybe prioritized to be some of it is maybe prioritized to be not essential for 2022. Maybe it's in a prior year. There's some big ticket items in there, primarily the equipment replacement. I think the biggest one I saw maybe this year was the replacement of that fire engine. But typically there's some ambulances that are flowing through and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure if staff necessarily has maybe a lot of comment on what basis or background of that might be, but there's some fairly significant dollars. If they're not this year, they're in the future years, and just kind of maybe what the maybe multi-year plan or status might be on some of that. But
Well, there's a fair amount of DPW equipment too that goes on.
correct. Anybody else's thoughts? Anybody have a list of changes?
I have a couple comments on the CIP that you had just mentioned.
Okay.
2022, you're right, there were a lot of equipment versus replacement equipment. I mean, there was some replacement equipment that got transferred to out years. The mayor did have that conversation with the departments to talk about, what the real needs were and things.
Is that part of that 160, excuse me, Peggy, is that part of that 165, or maybe I'm on the wrong page,
Yes, so starting with section 8.
maybe if we can just kind of take a quick peek at that, because I think, and again, I'm not a council member, but if I were sitting in that chair, I think these are some significant dollars that will be impacting us, if not for 16th
Page
vote.
250 of your book, 250.
Okay, thank you.
Is where it begins.
Right.
And then the 2 pages before that, well, really just 247 and 248, they talk a little bit about what the recommendations were by department. I should have given it to you and I didn't, but I have what the requests were per department. Should have given it to you and I didn't, but I have what the requests were per department versus what the mayor's recommendations were. There were $28 million of requests for 2022, and the mayor recommended that 19.5 million go forward. So there was about 9 million that didn't go forward. So there was about 9 million that didn't go forward. What I will tell you is the original request was well over 140 million. And so what we had talked about internally as staff is hopefully the finance committee would be willing to start looking at the out years after the 2022 approval gets done, because the importance of looking at those out years and talking about things like park impact fees that need to be spent and where resources are available. The next piece of this is going to be the financial plan, and it's really hard to create a financial plan if we don't have kind of the projects talked about. So we were hoping from a staff perspective that we could be talking about the details perhaps in January with the finance committee. Maybe it's going to take a couple months, and then some recommendations to council off cycle, so that we can go ahead and create that financial plan. As the finance director mentioned, we have no new general borrowing for 2022. That's part of the plan. 2023, it's that 2 million. Well, you can see by these requests that 2 million. 2 million, and there's other resources, right? There's landfill siting, which is an awesome resource. If we didn't have that, we'd be like other communities and we'd be borrowing for a lot of these things. We also wouldn't probably be doing $28 million worth of projects if we were borrowing for it. So there's definitely some merit to that. We also talked, the finance director and I talked about extra landfill siting fees. We try to be a little bit conservative on those. There is no policy in place, but you use 2 funds, Paul, usually to split extra landfill siting fees. Which 2 funds are those?
I'm putting those into the equipment replacement fund and the street improvement fund.
So we thought perhaps maybe solidifying that as a real policy going forward as we're talking about this would be a good idea. Those are funds. The equipment replacement, definitely, we're not sourcing it the way we should be doing it. We just can't, because when you buy something right up front and then you talk about how much needs to go in, the replacement cost goes up, things happen and the equipment replacement moves up in the cycle, and different policy perhaps around that. And then maybe there's going to be some excess, there are already some remaining excess impact fees from prior where the city had to borrow because the impact fees didn't come in fast enough. There could also be some policy discussions on how we want to handle that, but we feel like that's going to need, right? We don't want to spend it all in 1 year. The idea is to have somewhat of a soft landing. And again, if the borrowing goes too high, that means that debt service levy that the finance director talked about being stable over the next couple of years really wouldn't be. So there's a lot of policy decisions, I think financial policy decisions that revolve around talking about some of those recommendations and what that plan might look like. So for 2023 budget, we're hoping that the CIP will be done somewhere in the neighborhood of May, so that June, July, we can be talking at finance about those kind of things. And then by the time we hit the operations budget cycle, those are just part.
I think just as a general observation, I think we have been doing a little bit of kicking the can down the road on some of these things, like the streets and the DPW equipment and manpower. And, you know, I get it that it's always, but there probably will be a point of reckoning with some of this stuff.
What's, if I might just dovetail on that, John, and I do not want to cut you off if you're finished. That's an interesting, because that's one of my first comments, or 6 maybe. It's the replacement of dump truck number 760, which I think was scheduled this year and now planned for 723, about 275,000. You talk about, planning, we got to have obviously the manpower that needs it. What's the current condition of the vehicle? Is there, because this stuff is an estimate, we move it around, but, pretty significant piece of equipment. If it truly is not functioning and able to deliver services, to me, that's an issue. In that before we've pushed things further down, maybe doesn't have the usage or mileage that was anticipated, or amount of wear, tear, whatever. But they all have to kind of fit together, the manpower equation, et cetera, et cetera. So my recommending that necessarily be changed, but I guess I'm assuming with the mayor's discussion and the staff discussion, everybody in the management of the city is at least, I don't want to say necessarily okay with that, but see that as a I don't want to say necessarily okay with that, but see that as a viable plan without putting us at increased risk. Does that make sense?
It made sense. It definitely makes sense. I don't know that we've had enough discussions to know that at this point. I don't know that we've had enough discussions to know that at this point. I think now when we have actually 5 years in front of us, see, the problem we have in Franklin, just to be very candid, is setting priorities, right? Because we've had a lot of funds available, so whatever has been needed or come up during the year, we've just available. So whatever has been needed or come up during the year, we've just done it and made it happen. And I think sometimes that creates this level of expectations. And I think when you start looking at Public Works, I don't mean to pick on them, but there's a lot of asks in here from Public Works over the next 5 years. There's a lot of asks in here from Public Works over the next 5 years. There's a new facility that's going to cost near $20 million. So at that point, those discussions have to be had about, okay, if we want this, what is it that we can do without? And we can't have everything we want. Our streets aren't perfect, but I could take all of you on some tours of our neighboring cities and county, and I can tell you it's also not doomsday here either. So I think we just have to find that equilibrium, and you're right, we have to make sure that we can all agree that on what's viable.
Streets in particular are a common problem. I mean,
Challenge, no matter, I think, what you try to do.
There's two other elements, and I think the Director of Administration alluded to it. Number one, in the 5-year plan, one other element that will be required is to what kind of financing is going to be necessary to finance whatever it is you decide you're going to do, and what does that do to your total. The committee needs to understand, and maybe the council when it gets there, is that this 5-year plan does not, I believe, include any tax incremental financing requirements. And currently, a significant portion of our total outstanding general obligation debt is TID related. So if there's going to be significant not TID related, how does that fit into our total debt picture? And those are the two, at least two additional pieces of this picture that needs to be at least a fuzzy look at, if not, because right now there's no look at it, or not enough look at it. There needs to be a some.
as interest rates have nowhere to go but up, so.
If we pursue that avenue, yes. And right along with that, the TIDs, I mean, I think you mentioned it, Paul, we started the meeting, both 3 and 4 are reaching their area where they flip from being, when count the TID and the spending and the debt that goes with it, you're kind of out there not knowing really what's going to happen. It's kind of like, what's with Strauss and what's happening and how many holes and houses, it's all kind of fuzzy. But when you get to that point and it flips back over and now we get that revenue coming in, those should help the resources. Stage is the risky part, or where it becomes, kind of unknown and subject to so many things. I mean, pandemics, interest rates, economy, what's out there. I mean, all of those things hard to predict. But I think on an overall whole have been quite positive for the city.
They really have, and as the finance director mentioned, we do have some shortfall payments on the TID side, but we have a lot of debt out there, and we're likely going to have a lot more debt before we get some relief. The good news, though, is those TIDs 3 and 4 that are going to directly impact our levy workshop, to have one close per year, it really helps us depending on what CPI and what growth and different things look like at that point. There's one area that we do need, and someone mentioned it earlier, as far as the DPW staffing. That's something that we're already looking at. We have a meeting actually scheduled for tomorrow to start just that deep dive on where our resources, a lot of times we don't like to compare ourselves to other communities, but we really need to, just to bring that reality back in. So we're going to be doing...
His comparisons, we did not look that great.
Right. So I think that, if we can bring all that together, if we can bring all that together and look at, there's some things that perhaps we're doing in Public Works that maybe we don't need to do. I know the city engineer mentioned tonight about mowing in the parks. That certainly is a possibility. What I will tell you is I've been down that path. I've been down that path out of necessity, and it doesn't really work out that well for the community because you can't count on anyone like you can count on your own employees. And so there's just a lot of give and takes in all of that. But if we can, as a city, make sure that we are all clear on what the priorities are and what we should be doing, maybe that means on the recycling center, we don't close it down. Maybe we just limit the hours and we do different things because, right, we're a service business and we have to figure out what our constituents and citizens want out of that. So there's a lot of discussions and decisions to be made. On those going forward. But that's something, DPW staffing, i.e. park staffing, is something we really need to look at as we add all this new infrastructure.
Well, even there, I mean, going opposite to what they're doing out the landfill, they're not available on Tuesday, Thursday to appease you that way. So you always have an option and choice. The other thing with some of those visible services, like even in the parks, I mean, you see the trucks out. I mean, the citizens have, that's visible. They see that, work getting done. I don't know that they know that where their dollars are, hours being spent. Sometimes when it's done by somebody outside, well, we're critical of this, critical of that. Well, there's a lot of things that are happening. What else is happening in the city activity-wise? Voting, park festivals, whatever, rain, weather, etc. More complex balancing act and really a management exercise and opportunity maybe at the same time.
Well, I think that's why there's been a reluctance to use the park impact fees too, because it just adds to the maintenance cost.
But some of that decision, that was kind of built into the decision when they when they opted to put them in the first place. So there was a ball that started rolling that the council is has running behind them ever since.
There's always two sides of the coin.
Exactly. The other thing, I think, great discussion, but the other thing, Peggy, I want to definitely talk about just a little bit, and I think I heard some of it during our discussions a little bit. And I was pleased, and I specifically want to bring this up. we continue to talk about some shared services. There's been talk about, and we've seen it done, North Shore with their and we've seen it done, North Shore with their fire service protection. But and forgive me, I don't know maybe which specific department. I think it was fire. I know police has some, stuff in terms of even, the equipment, and has some, stuff in terms of even, the equipment, and can we be more effective in sharing with, other communities? We're kind of all in the same business, and to the extent that we can, help each other out or assist or gain efficiencies, from that standpoint. And one that I heard, and I think it was you, Peggy, and I commend you, was working with the school district in, forgive me if it was insurance related
Internet services.
or internet service. Perfect example. I mean, we're all school district, or Oak Creek School District, or Hales Corners, or City of Greenfield, or whatever. And to the extent that we can get either better service, better quality, better pricing, all of those things I think are beneficial. And the other thing that I see there is it a way for us to spread our limited sources. Peggy, there's only one of you, and I'm sure you like to, get on vacation and take a few days off here and there. But if each one of you doesn't have to go out and research the same internet service from the same vendors for every one, and you have a small consortium, or it's like, well, it just frees up time for another project or solution, and vice versa, sharing information back. And I mean, I've seen that. Some of the RFPs, I don't know who the last one, maybe it was Valuation Services, or I know you came, and just ways to work together, and especially with the school district. I mean, it seems like it's a natural fit. I mean, we're all buying insurance, right? We got to insure the property. We're all buying the coverages. We all need workers' comp. We all need those opportunities. So, to the extent that we can, I would hope that we would continue to work toward that, and I suspect there'd be some benefits with it as well.
So you're exactly right. So you're exactly right. We've been trying to do a lot more of that this past year. First thing, the easiest part is sharing information, right? We're really good at doing that with our neighbors, because why would we recreate the wheel when we can get information from other communities? So there's a lot of inner city and agency government. So there's a lot of inner city and governmental agency sharing. There's another thing that I introduced this year was basically the buying group. Now, the city, we've been part of this value group. It's basically Milwaukee County, Southeast Wisconsin, trying to do the economies of scales. We have the credit cards, the buy cards through the government services, but this scales. We have the credit cards, the buy cards through the government services, but this purchasing group, every once in a while, some city or some governmental entity will select something. So, for example, Waukesha County was handling all the ammunition. So I saw that come through. I shot it off to the police department. I got a note that come through. I shot it off to the police department. I got a note back from the assistant chief that said, "Hey, it looks like we're going to be able to do this. I contacted the person you told us to, and we're going to save a ton of money on our ammunition. Not only that, but we're actually going to be able to get it, because there's really a long lead time on that stuff." So that buying group is really important. Like you said, with the school district, the insurances. At that, the Milwaukee County Fire Group just did equipment sharing. That might be what you're referring to. It was the first equipment sharing agreement that had been done in Milwaukee County, and I think the council just approved it at the last council meeting. So that, again, is a very important one. We need to think bigger, though, and our fire chief is amazing at this, but like a ladder truck, right? How often do you, instead of us all buying our own new shiny ladder truck and keeping it on the side, we can start, doing it geographically so it makes sense, right? We don't want something to burn down because we don't have that available, but so we just have to start doing the small stuff and then start thinking bigger and bigger. But honestly, if it was up to our fire chief, we probably wouldn't. He understands the value of all those resources pulling together.
Well, and that's the type of experience in leadership that, you know, we need to think, when you mentioned that we are, what, the second, or no, what did I write down? What are we, the third largest fish now in the county? I mean, we need to start, you know, act position to put some of these things in places so that somebody like Hales Corners, and again, not to pick on them or anything, but I mean, their size community isn't going to have a ladder truck, you know, but yet they would probably be very interested in their, you know, having one available or being in a consortium or one available or being in a consortium or whatever to have access to one if and when it should be needed. As I think, as you said, any other regional area as well, but for multiple ones to be out there, you know, sitting, being shined up and then collecting dust, if that's the right terminology, is probably unnecessary. Collecting dust, if that's the right terminology, is probably unnecessary and you know, not needed for so many reasons. Money being just one of them, but you got to store it, insure it, you know, clean it, keep it certified. You know, it just goes on. So keep it certified. You know, it just goes on. So we need to, I think, keep on making sure that our management team is thinking forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments or things we want to talk about? Yes.
I have a couple things possibly, and not to, as Mr. Howard said, not to micromanage. We didn't have an opportunity because we don't have purview over the library's budget. But our library director has been here for every one of our meetings, and she had made a request for her budget because the only thing that council out of the tax levy. And I've spoken with her about her budget, and I've heard from some members of the library board as well, hoping we could maybe somewhere find the additional $10,000 that was requested for their budget. You know, and they're also going to be 20 years old, if we can believe it or not. And so they're looking at a lot of repairs and expenses, so that fund balance is going to be spent down pretty significantly over the next year or two with a lot of that going on. But they're also dealing with trying to balance that with not cutting services or staffing. And the library is very much a large service center of the community. It's basically the community center that we don't have anywhere else. You know, I'd like to be able to preserve that request for them. I'm worried if we kind of chip away at that year after year after year, that problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, they're not able to keep up with those sort of costs. On a somewhat related note, on the capital improvement plan, and Peggy, you and I have had some side discussions, particularly with the park improvements, because I was looking at one particular, and it's a small one, but was wondering if we could get the ice rink in under this year's budget, not out of next year's, if we had any extra money this year, and get that done. I
believe the ice rink is in the 2022 budget.
It is, but I was saying hopefully we could get it purchased this year. Just about.
I'll let you, yeah, I was gonna say, I'll let you finish. I have some comments, but I'll let you
Okay,
finish.
and that's fine. I'm also looking at another line in the capital improvement plan that we have in the 2022 budget. I'm kind of doubtful it's going to be able to happen. Fronting Park.
I don't know that I'm ready to take it out just yet, but I think it's,
What item is it, excuse me?
Down at the bottom of,
Third page.
First page of the-
First page of the
yeah.
CIP.
first page of that, the third line from the bottom. Resurface tennis courts at Fleming Park.
so is that all of your items?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
That's
so I
included
can
in
start with that one.
2022.
It is
correct.
included in 2022.
It is included in 2022, but I will tell you, there's a catch with that one. So Fleming Park is not run by the city, that's a county park. So this technically isn't the city's responsibility. The city, it'd be hard to start doing everything that the county hasn't been doing. This one has been included because there could be perhaps a swap or a share done with the county so that the city could do this in exchange for the county doing something else. I can tell you that's not looking as promising as we thought it was, but we didn't want to do that. Would not be high on the city's list if there's not some reciprocity happening with the county, because we can't afford to maintain. And then at the bottom, you see our tennis courts that were requested in 2022 that we had to move already to 2023. So
Right.
that one is included because of a share with, thing is, we thought it might have been a month ago, but we're still working on it and we haven't given up hope on it.
Where's John when you need him, right? He's with the county, isn't he, in Parks?
He's not anymore. Now, he used to be, but now he's not.
Oh, he's not, okay.
He's now out at Waterford full-time.
Oh,
So, capital improvement plan is, we've had a lot of things in 2021 come up. Our contingency is pretty much spent all the way
Okay.
around the block
Okay.
for 21. So, but if the budget gets approved in November, there is some work that could happen so that could happen
Okay.
early in the 2022 year. In regard to the library is a very important service for the community, but I don't want you to think the mayor didn't think about this. He did want to make sure that there was some increase in addition to the landfill siting fees that are already going there. Budget is tight every year, but there's a fund balance at the library of about $700,000. And just to put it into perspective, parking lot that needs to be done at the library to the tune of about $435,000. And the city is planning on including that in its capital needs, not the library's capital needs. So there was, a bit of foresight in just saying, can we make this work for this year and go forward on that? I'm not saying it's the right or wrong answer. I'm just saying there was a lot of let's give the library less money by any stretch. And a lot of stuff in the library budget currently is capital needs, and it's very appropriate to spend fund balance on those. So we have to distinguish between, the city certainly owns the building, and there's going to be a lot of bigger capital items that come up because of we know this because we did the survey on all of the city buildings over the last spring of 2020 is when we did it. We've been recently updating that, and now there's a work order put together the council just approved so that industrial roofing come in and partner with us on doing a lot of maintenance. And the second part of that will be the capital items. And there's already an understanding from the city's perspective that the library won't be able to fund any of those things, but those are going to be some huge asks that are going to, we've made a commitment as far as city priorities to go to the biggest needs, not necessarily this building or that building. There's been a lot of discussion in the past about if you're in this building, you get preferential treatment and you always get what you ask for and things like that. But in this capital and maintenance infrastructure and facilities plan, we've made a commitment to go with the biggest needs of the city, and there are going to be some for the library coming up. So that would be a commitment on the city side as well. But that $700,000 in fund balance it is very sized. That requires the library to have a $100,000 fund balance. It's a little bit different than a city fund balance because the library building and parking lot basically have the city to rest upon on those bigger items, whereas the city itself doesn't. So with that being a $100,000 requirement and it's sitting close to $700,000, just shy of a prudent decision for this year.
just one comment on the ice rink. and I see it's portable, and I don't know the location and what it's being deemed at, but just for information purposes, the city of Greenfield, I don't know if they've approved their TIF financing. I think they have, but there's going to be a pretty significant improvement at the corner of Highway 36 and the freeway. And I know ice time is quite limited, but I think many high schools, have limited places to go with ice time, so on and so forth. I think they've got some lower level plans, lower level NHL. And again, I'm not a hockey sport expert, but that project, as I understand it, is supposed to be, I think, moving forward here relatively quickly. It won't be in the city of Franklin, obviously, but I think it's geared at, I know a little bit from the ownership there, geared at, providing some relief to a real shortage of ice time. And whether the high school, I know there, I think some of those are targeted, and does Franklin do a shared thing with Muskego now, or last I heard, I don't know the specifics, but I'm suspecting that'll get,
I think most of them play private club.
is it?
High scores.
Yeah. Might be in line for that facility as it comes on board. Anything else? John, Ed, anybody else? John, Ed, anybody else?
I would like to thank once again for the capital improvement plan. I know this was, but boy, it's nice to see it all laid out year by year by year, not set in stone.
First step, yeah, it's a good first step, I'll say. We have a long way to go as far as, dissecting what it really looks like. Of course, we're always going to keep that year 6, but there will be a lot of tough decisions. The more items you put in, so I think, again, if we can talk about it when it's not, we're sitting here at budget time trying to make those determinations, we might be able to make some better decisions, get some more information out there, and get that financial planning to match up a little bit better. So that's the goal for 2022.
Is there anything that the two of, as we sit here in early October, we're in the fourth quarter, that either is significant that's not going to get done, get carried over, or not, moving forward? The water, is the water utility moving forward with the construction plans for the tower? Because I know that's somewhat time sensitive in our dollar. I guess I just might ask that question in general.
I can speak to the water utility. The water utility has a construction authorization application in with the Public Service Commission. They have not yet scheduled a hearing on it. Once they approve it, then we can go to bid for that project. The construction cycle would be 18 months.
Okay.
So that is at best going to be a 22-23 project, and depending on how quickly in 22 they can start, it may spill over into 23-24.
And part of that fees, so we haven't done water and sewer impact fees for a long time. Those are in process right now. We have a meeting tomorrow morning. We're hoping that the council's going to be considering that in November. It's also needed for that water project because we are using a fair amount of impact fees. We're planning to, and without a current impact study, we believe that it's something we really need to get done before that construction authorization is considered. So that's a big one. We have a future water source discussion that we're in the middle of. We're hoping that we're going to have some direction on that at the latest in Q2 of 2022, but then we have the exploration of the DPW and fire facilities that are going on right now. We should have some answers on that in the next month or so. We have a security RFP that we're going to be putting out very shortly, that some of that may get carried over to 2022. We also have to do the capital side of that yet this year. Industrial Roofing is partnering with the city, and they're going to get going on the maintenance stuff. They believe they can find vendors for that. They don't believe that they're going to be able to find vendors for some of those capital items. That'll likely happen in the beginning of 22. So there will be some carryover for that. We are looking for that. We believe there's going to be some IT money left in 21 that we would like to do some of the security testing for, vulnerability and penetration testing coming up here. That likely would get carried over to 22 to do that. And then the only other one I can think of is the temp help in inspections. That Norm, it was one-time money, but it's approximately $70,000. Until they use it, we would want to carry that over to handle any peaks in the construction cycle.
Speaking of construction, the project that's going on along Highway 100, Ryan Road, I believe that's part of the Waukesha. Is that any way impacting us? Do we have any costs or responsibilities whatsoever as it's going across our land?
We don't. The only connection to the city of Franklin is that happens to be one of the places where that shared internet service might go. So that's what we've been working with the school district and the city of Waukesha, Muskego Norway School District, and the city of Waukesha, Muskego Norway School District to try to have Waukesha piggyback that onto their project, because then that means we don't have to do all of the digging for it. So we could save not a few bucks, but at least tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So, and the school district, owns some land out there to the, and the school district, owns some land out there to the, what would that be, to the west of the Public Works facility. And they're also looking at needs for the future, so there'd be shared costs, and we wouldn't have to do it on our own, and they wouldn't have to do it on their own, and we might be able to get it done less expensive.
That's for the
Done less expensive.
That's for the water project for them to start purchasing
It's
for.
the return
It's the
flow.
return
Right.
process.
But they would be doing purchases from Milwaukee, as I understand it.
Correct.
In the big scheme of things. There was one other thing that the water tower location, that's established just north of the Ryan Road Highway. That's established just north of the Ryan Road Highway 100 or
The DNR has been asking a lot of questions about environmental impacts with that, so that hasn't yet been approved by the DNR, that location.
Okay, but that's one that's being
Right.
recommended.
The city's purchased the land with the anticipation that they're going to get approval.
Okay. New TIFT activity?
There's
Signing points, yeah.
We believe, and we've been saying this for months, so take it with a grain of salt, but we believe there are 3 projects that are very, very close to signing on the dotted line.
3, did you say?
3. Over 1 million square feet of office, light industrial, flex space. Infrastructure work and investment on the city's part, so
And debt?
the negotiations have been challenging at best.
Have to have an interest rate clause in there. If they go up from where they are now, they pay the difference, right, John?
Yeah.
If it only worked. Any other significant challenges and/or opportunities that you see?
Well, we're going to lose our finance director.
Oh, yeah?
That's a huge one. Paul's put us in a very good place. He's doing, he's leaving more than crumbs for us and getting things in line. Hard to replace him, but the things he's putting in place right now are going to be very helpful for us going down the path.
What about, and this changed subject a little bit, but we'll get back to Paul and I think his contributions. But I want to switch back over to health a little bit and just our, this thing is obviously not going to be over by July 4th, as our president had hoped, or maybe all of us hoped, me included. But as we kind of see this thing continuing on and how it's kind of ebbing and flowing and whatever it looks like, at least from what I kind of see from services with the vaccines and making them available, and even I guess as we kind of roll into the next phase, which is most likely to be the 5-year-olds and up and so forth. I mean, we've got capacity and staffing and some resources government continues to offer. So are we okay there? I mean, you jump up and bite us?
I think the biggest thing we can say about COVID right now is this city has been in a really good position to respond to everything that was been going on. It got better, it got worse. We think it's getting better now. We'll see. But I can tell you the health department has very good plans in place, just like they did with the younger people. They have a lot of mitigation plans, and they're trying to do a lot of different things. Resources are not an issue. Monetary resources are not an issue. Our biggest concern continues to be staff resources. We can't afford. We're a very lean staff, so it would be really hard for us to lose big. But it would be really hard for us to lose big parts of our employee staff to COVID. But we do think we've been doing mitigation pretty well, and we have found very, very, very few cases that have originated at the city, which is good. But you can't control what people do, right? So they originated at the city, which is good, but you can't control what people do, right? So they can go out and do what they want, and it's their freedom of choice. But we're really trying to put a lot of things in place so that we have backups and technologies and plan Bs in place when and if needed. So, and I don't think it's going to be a plan Bs in place when and if needed. So, and I don't think it's going to be a financial resource issue. I think it's much more going to be a human resource issue.
Are there, other than the gentleman to my right, Paul's retirement, are there others that we're aware of that'll be affecting us in the next 12 to 15 months? Right, Paul's retirement, are there others that we're aware of that'll be affecting us in the next 12 to 15 months?
I can tell you, going into 2022, our outlook is better than it was going into 2021. We lost 11 police officers from 1/1 till April 20th of 2021. As of August 28th, we had every single one of those filled, which is nothing short of amazing. We did just lose one of those, so we're down one, and then we have another one that they're working on. But the police and fire have both been very aggressive in that. We have a couple retirements expected and not anything close to the 11 that we had this year. I believe 4, and it will happen over time. We have a couple in the fire department. None others that I know of.
Interesting at the police, because as I talked to some of those suburban department, whatever, fairly highly sought, I think, or attractive. But I'm sure there's many, different reasons for departures and whatever as well. But
tough, right? It's tough to be a police officer today. But you're right. We have been very lucky with lateral transfers. That's been our main hiring source. And when you get a lateral transfer, typically what you get is you get somebody trained and experienced, and there's a lot less unknowns. Not always, but the majority of the time. So I think if the chief was here tonight, he would tell you. And I think just the city supporting the police and fire departments are important right now.
And since we're kind of just talking about that, what's you've had a chance to kind of come in and kick the tires and see what this place looks like. I'm curious to have your assessment.
I think, well,
Would you like me to step out of the room?
No, and to tell you the truth, that's where I'd like to start is with finance. When we talk about recruiting for this position, Paul and I have had discussion upon discussion. Financially, we're in a really good shape. We're in a really, really good position. I don't think that's going to erode over a year or 2 or 5. We have a lot of work to do to stay there. I think that are broke. I think what we have to do is we've been lucky because we've had resources available that other communities didn't. So we've been able to perhaps move forward on some of our old principles and preferences. I think we're gonna and that's a hard thing to do. You know, this whole do more with less kind of thing. You can say it, and sometimes it's words, but sometimes you really have to choose, right? The community has to choose what's important. And at some point in the future, this community will have to make choices it's never had to before. That is our internal limit of our available capacity. I think if things go with the TIDS the way they're going to, and we want to build a new DPW or fire facility, that's going to have to be adjusted. The question is do we, and I hope we do this, but we should really have these conversations before we hit to right on the cusp of those decisions. Just get too personal when you're talking about this specific project or that. But I think that's really, again, the importance of the capital improvement plan going forward. So, no, I think Franklin, generally speaking, is behind what other communities have had to do that's been undesirable, and that's a good thing. Now we just have to, that's been undesirable, and that's a good thing. Now we just have to find a way to navigate through that without letting it negatively impact us too much.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I think one of the biggest ones is these post-employment benefit obligations. That was kind of a big one that was thrust upon nations. That was kind of a big one that was thrust upon, municipalities. They were just kind of pay as you go. But in some regards, it's no different than this. I mean, you hire those people and you promise them benefits for this period of time, and you promise them benefits for this period of time, and those are obligations out there. But yeah, I think I think it was somewhere here at one of these meetings, what was the projected population of Franklin fully built out? 60,000? Did population of Franklin fully built out 60,000 or something? Those are probably the challenges that we have to start kind of preparing ourselves for, and being able to think and manage, and hearing the police department saying we could regional basis or whatever with our neighboring communities. We all have the same challenges and services we want to provide, and migrating up to that, whether it's the facilities like you said with the new police structure, or fire department structure, DPW, forward thinking, if you will, and obviously Paul in his role, and who's going to follow in those steps, and yourself are critical in that piece. So I want to thank you, both personally for all of that input too. I mean, we won't have the quality of it in front of us, and I'm sure, the mayor has to, some of the spends, I'm sure, more time, trying to wrestle with priority number 1, 2, or 3, or, which order they go in, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously every council member has, the final weigh in on that, decision. Yeah, I think if I think back to where we started with some of this stuff, the financial health of the city has changed dramatically. I'll just say it that way. I think things, but again, it was a small, rural farm transition itself and find its identity. Good. Do we want to make the recommendation to submit the council as we have it, or is there anything else anybody wants to talk?
With the amendments that we made today.
Yep, those to be included. Does somebody want to make a motion? All right, you want to summarize that a little bit, Ed? Yeah.
Make a motion to adopt the proposed budget with the amendments that we made today.
As presented by the mayor and staff with the amendments to be included?
Correct.
I will second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? we have a recommendation to the council.
Thank you. Thank all of you, because I know it's a lot of work on your part as well, and I think there's a lot of value to the way we're going through the budget last year and this year compared to what I've been explained. Just, you get to talk about a lot more, and we have pages of ideas and ways to move forward that I think we perhaps wouldn't get if we did at the council level.
I feel like this was more concise even than last year,
Oh, yeah.
but I appreciate the opportunity. To
Well,
go
last year
through
was
this
the
as we
first
did.
time we really got involved in it, and it was kind of an eye-opener.
Correct. I think the process last year was the first time we were really involved. I mean, prior to that, the process, it went right from the department request to this, and then the process, it went right from the department request to this, and then from here to the council, and it was kind of a disjointed, you know, so I think this is much cleaner. But I have to, just one comment for the council members that are here. The finance committee, just one comment for the council members that are here. The finance committee, works at your request. I mean, we don't make any policy. We don't vote on, anything. Doesn't become requirement, doesn't become city ordinance or whatever. We're here just as an advised requirement, doesn't become city ordinance or whatever. We're here just as an advising group. But the mayor continues to tell me that, he said, you don't understand how valuable it is. So, I mean, that's I guess if there's gratitude for us, that's what it is, to at least provide some insight, use our backgrounds. John's knowledge obviously is immense as well, accounting and investment related. I've done a little bit in the banking side, and and some of us have some knowledge and history with the city. So they require you to say you've got to have experience in this, and you got to have experience in that, and you got to have experience in this and whatever. I mean, you need to be have good people, I guess, around you and providing you information and recommendations, and after that, it's that becomes your decision. So, you're welcome. You're welcome.
And
It's-
Mr. Howard as well, and
For sure. I've worked with a lot of finance committees, none as good as this one.
Oh yeah. Shoot, John. I think she's trying to tell us we can't resign yet.
yeah, that's
I
right.
keep on telling the mayor I want to get fired. I keep on asking him. Do we have anything else on the agenda that needs to be handled? Find the agenda. List of recommended changes to the council. I guess we've got that. Paul, do we have everything you need?
I believe we do.
There will be a public hearing, right? Just welcome or encourage anybody to attend. Sometimes those are very interesting meetings. You get anything from somebody painting the fire hydrant on such and such a corner to whatever. But it is the citizens it's their right. It's healthy discussion in terms of just what's on the mind of the population and what's going on. It is their taxpayer money. There's no question about that. So that'll be published, and right now that is the 16th. Is that when it's planned?
November 6th.
Be the public hearing.
Correct.
And are we still having our regular meeting on the 26th of October?
It's probable that we'll have a meeting on October 26th.
That would be back to our second,
Fourth Tuesday of the month.
okay. November 16th, unfortunately, I will probably not be in town, so I in the past have tried to attend those hearings, but I don't think my travel plans will allow it for this year. But if there's not anything else,
I move we adjourn.
motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion to adjourn? Hearing none. All those favor? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.